Unit 3, Sociology, Women, Men, and Changing Roles. Chapter 5, The Women's Movement, From Liberation to Feminism.
The women's movement in the United States is a social movement that is nearly a century and a half old, according to Barbara Ryan, author of Feminism and the Women's Movement. According to Ryan, organized activity on behalf of women's rights began in the mid-1800s when, both by law and by custom, women were considered non-persons. Married women, for example, were prevented by law from inheriting property, from controlling the money that they earned, or from retaining custody of their children if they were divorced by their husbands. In addition, no woman was allowed to vote on the laws that governed her life. In the early 1900s, important changes occurred in the social and political climate in Europe and the United States as a result of World War I. After the war, a number of countries granted women the right to vote, and in 1920, American women gained the right to vote. 20 years later, another war brought major social changes that affected the lives of many men and women. One of the social changes involved women working outside the home. During World War II, large numbers of women entered the job market to do the jobs of the men who had been drafted into military service. A great many of these women became factory workers, and they proved themselves to be capable and dependable workers. Today, women have gained more employment and job opportunities, and they hold different jobs and occupations. Women are breaking into male-dominated fields, from sports writing to police work to firefighting, though their progress into these male-dominated professions is slow. In fact, women make up only 1.5% of the 200,000 professional firefighters in the United States today, and they make up only 4% of airline pilots and navigators. In addition to entering male-dominated professions, many women are starting their own businesses and operating successful businesses today. It is becoming more common to find women occupying positions of leadership in American business. In fact, women-owned business is one of the fastest-growing segments of the United States economy. In 2003, for example, the U.S. Small Business Administration reported that in the United States, 9.1 million women-owned businesses employed 27.5 million people and contributed $3.6 trillion to the American economy. In other words, women business owners are critically important to the American economy. According to a 2004 study by the Center for Women's Business Research, the nation's hotspots for women entrepreneurs are clustered in the western part of the United States. Idaho and Wyoming are tied for first place, followed by Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, as the 5 states in the United States where the greatest growth and expansion in women-owned businesses occurred. Between 1997 and 2004, on average, the number of women-owned businesses in these 5 states grew at more than twice the rate of the rest of the country. The average rate of women-owned businesses was 28.8%, compared to 14% for all other states in the United States. As many as 10 years ago, women-owned businesses employed more people domestically than the Fortune 500 companies did worldwide. Why are women entrepreneurs so successful? The founder and president of the American Women's Economic Development Corporation in New York, Beatrice Fitzpatrick, says, "A woman would no more let her business fail than she would let someone kill her child." But for some women, success in business has not come without the costs of overwork, burnout, and potential damage to health, friendships, or family relationships. According to the authors of the book Megatrends for Women, the great challenge for millions of successful women entrepreneurs and other professionals is to maintain their success while being sure that they have a balance between work and their family and social lives. Women have advanced to leadership positions not only in business, but also in politics. Women have become important political leaders all over the world, though politics is still largely a male-dominated world. For instance, in 1969 in the United States, only 4% of the state lawmakers were women. By 2003, this number had grown by more than 500%, and 22.3% of state legislators were women. Although this may seem like a great increase, it must be remembered that women make up more than 50% of the population in the United States. So they are not yet receiving equal representation in the world of politics in the United States. The United States has not yet had a woman president, although women have served as presidents of Ireland, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. Many other countries have had female political leaders. Women have served as prime ministers in the United Kingdom, France, Turkey, Pakistan, Canada, and Bangladesh. The family has changed a lot since women have become so active outside the home. Today, less than 10% of American families have the traditional working father and the mother who stays home to take care of the children. To make up for the time that women are spending out of the home, many men are having to play more of an active role in raising their children. Government and businesses are also becoming more concerned about helping working families with child care. But much more needs to be done to help women and men take care of their children while they're at work. In spite of the fact that the rate of women's participation in the workforce rose from 27% in 1940 to 57.6% in 2003, including more than half of all women with a child under the age of 1 year, there is still no government-sponsored child care or parental leave policy in the United States. According to Barbara Ryan, a major obstacle to women's emancipation lies in the lack of government-sponsored social service support for working women who have children to support. Because problems are still preventing some women from taking equal place in society, many people still believe that a women's movement is still necessary. However, many diverse opinions have emerged about how to achieve equality for women and men in work, education, politics, and the home. Some activists in the women's movement call themselves feminists, whereas others who resist political activism choose not to label themselves feminists because they feel that the U.S. media often portray feminists as people who are anti-men. Most feminists do not take such an attitude at all. In any case, the word feminism and the principles of feminism are not easy to define because they mean different things to different people. In her book, Feminism and the Women's Movement, Barbara Ryan provides a number of definitions of the term feminism. She quotes one woman who says that, in her opinion, feminism represents the best of what it means to be human. Anybody can be a feminist, except you have to work at it. Basically, to me, it is the belief that everybody should have the opportunity to be the best that they can be, and we ought to have a world that encourages that. The names and terms associated with the movement, however, are not nearly as important as the changes that feminism and the women's movement have caused in American society. Because of this century-and-a-half-old movement, women are contributing more to American society, and society is benefiting from their contributions. As a result of the women's movement, women's liberation, and feminism, women are enjoying new freedom, new opportunities, new responsibilities, and new headaches.
Unit 3, Sociology, Women, Men, and Changing Roles. Chapter 6, The Men's Movement. What does it mean to be a man?
The women's movement has gained a lot of attention in recent years in the U.S. and in countries around the world. As you heard in the last lecture, the women's movement has inspired many women to fight for equal rights and treatment in their homes, their personal relationships, and at work. It has also forced many women to examine and to rethink the roles they play in society. However, not only have women begun to examine and rethink the roles they play at home and work, and in modern society as a whole, but men also have begun to examine and rethink the roles they play in society, and to examine and rethink the various and changing roles they must play at home and at work today. Men have also begun to react in both positive and negative ways to the new expectations they must meet at home and work. Some men are adjusting well to the new roles that they must play as more and more women enter the job market. And some men are pleased that their wives and partners have jobs outside the home. However, some of the role changes men are having to make to accommodate their working wives and girlfriends and some of the new expectations concerning their masculinity are causing some of them a good deal of stress, anger, and confusion. Some men are even asking the question, what does it mean to be a real man in today's world? Many are confused about how they should treat women, whether these women are their female colleagues at work, their friends, or their wives. Some feel they are no longer king of the castle at home. As a result of this confusion and unhappiness, a counter-movement called the men's movement has sprung up alongside the women's movement in the United States. Men in the movement seek to provide one another with support that they need to cope with the stresses and strains of being a man in today's world, and to cope with the stresses and strains brought about by the professional advances made and the personal freedoms won by women in many countries over the past few decades. Some women view the men's movement as a backlash against the professional advances women have made and the personal freedoms they have won as a result of the women's movement. Many men, therefore, and many women also, see the men's movement as men's need to form a brotherhood for psychological support, just as women have formed support groups with other women. Others see the men's movement as men's attempt and need to understand more fully what it means and takes to be a real man at the start of the 21st century. When traditional definitions of manhood are changing or are under attack in many countries around the world. To begin this discussion of some of the catalysts for the men's movement, I'll say just a few words about why some women consider the men's movement a reaction against the women's movement. What the well-known author Susan Faludi calls the backlash against the women's movement. Ms. Faludi suggests that some men feel that women are becoming too independent and powerful today as a result of the professional advances they've made in the workplace and because of the personal freedoms they have gained in their family and personal relationships. She notes that the resentment of some men toward women's gaining power is not a recent phenomenon. More than 1900 years ago, the women of Rome tried to repeal a law that forbade them from riding in horse-drawn chariots and from wearing multicolored dresses. In 195 BCE, the Roman senator Cato expressed the fear and concern that the women of Rome had become so powerful that the independence of the men of Rome had been lost in their homes and was being trampled underfoot in public. In her book titled Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, Susan Faludi points out that many men today still resent women's progress in becoming independent personally and professionally. Faludi notes that a 7-year survey of American male attitudes in the 1980s found that no more than 5 to 10% of the men surveyed genuinely supported women's demands for independence and equality. It is likely that this attitude has not changed much today. Although some women view the men's movement as a backlash, many others see the men's movement as something that is good for both men and women. They see it as men's need to form a brotherhood for psychological support to protect their rights and personal freedoms, even as women form support groups with other women to protect and advance their rights. They think, for example, that women should not automatically be given custody of children when a divorce occurs, and yet this is what happens in the United States today. Finally, some authorities relate the development of the men's movement to the confusion created by the crisis of masculinity in contemporary society and the many and changing images portrayed in the popular media of who and what real men are and how they are supposed to act. If you watch American movies, you might find yourself asking, is the real man, for example, a sensitive guy like Dustin Hoffman's Tootsie? Is he an involved dad like Robin Williams' Mrs. Doubtfire? Or the father played by Steve Martin in Parenthood? A macho man like Arnold Schwarzenegger plays in The Terminator? Or is he a caring nurturer like the man Schwarzenegger played in Kindergarten Cop? Many men are searching for answers to this question and are attempting to find answers from the leaders of the men's movement. What are the origins of this crisis of masculinity that poses problems for many men today? Well, one of the historical reasons for the crisis, according to Robert Bly, a poet who is considered to be one of the founding fathers of the men's movement, is rooted in the changes that took place in the U.S. as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which occurred in the early to mid-1900s. When the Industrial Revolution began, the kinds of work that people did, that is, the kinds of work men did, of course, changed for many Americans. Before the Civil War, 88% of American males were small farmers, independent artisans, or small business owners. In these professions, the workers usually worked close to their homes. This meant that sons were constantly learning how to work and support themselves and their family by working alongside their fathers. By 1910, however, less than 1/3 of all men in the United States were self-employed. Sociologist Michael Kimmel points out that even then, many men felt that the concept of manhood was being threatened and was even vanishing because men no longer worked their land or had control over their labor. Many never got to see the fruits of their labor, as farmers and craftsmen usually do. Many men in the post-industrial revolution era had become mere cogs in the machines of industrial America. In addition, the change from a farm to an industrial society meant that instead of supporting their families by working near their homes as farmers, craftsmen, or small business owners, the majority of men began working in factories or offices. Often, the factories were far from their homes, and men had to travel long distances to work. This meant that the men were not home, and the amount of time fathers spent with their sons was greatly reduced. Young boys, therefore, did not have their fathers around to act as role models. The effects of the Industrial Revolution continue into the present day, according to men in the men's movement, and they want to address the problems it has brought. For example, many people are concerned that men still have little say in the upbringing of their children. The evolution of the women's movement had a profound effect on the development of the men's movement. As a result of the women's movement, more women are working outside the home, and many men are playing a more active role in family life, and they are taking on some of the tasks involved in childcare and housework. 30 to 40 years ago, care of the home and children was almost exclusively the responsibility of women. In addition to these changes inside the home, in the workplace, men are today entering occupations that used to be considered women's jobs. More men are becoming nurses and teachers of young children. Other men are finding that they have more female colleagues and bosses at work than ever before. And they're having to adapt to women's styles of communication and management, which can differ considerably from those of men. At work, as well as at home, many men today in the U.S. have to play very different roles than their fathers did. As a result, they are joining with other men in the men's movement, or they are reading books such as Robert Bly's Iron John to try to understand and cope with the roles expected of men in today's world. So some of the reasons for the men's movement can be attributed to three things. One, the changing roles brought about by the women's movement. Two, the Industrial Revolution. And three, men's desire to understand and affirm the concept of manhood. Exactly what forms does the men's movement take, and what do men in the men's movement hope to achieve by being active in the movement? To begin with, the men's movement has no unified, monolithic philosophy. Although there are a number of unifying themes, there are also some interesting differences between the basic groups associated with the men's movement. Several writers who write about the men's movement have identified four basic groups of men active in the movement. The first group is labeled the male feminists, and these men work for women's rights and equality between the sexes. Some of the men in this first group are vocal about blaming other men for much of the violence against women and for the inequality that exists between men and women in relationships and in the job market. Not all members of the men's movement, however, consider this first group of men to be an integral part of the men's movement. To be sure, the other three groups focus more on men's issues than do the so-called male feminists. The second orientation in the men's movement attracts men who join men's support groups to meet regularly and give and receive psychological support in dealing with problems created by the new roles they have to play at home and at work. These men are attempting to learn to better express their feelings and emotions and to show sensitivity without being ashamed. A third group in the men's movement consists of men who want to get back the power they feel they've lost because of the advances made by women as a result of the women's movement and feminist causes. Finally, there is an approach to the movement called the mythopoetic men's movement. The mythopoetic men's movement is often identified with Robert Bly, the poet, who wrote one of the most well-known books of the men's movement, Iron John. The men involved in this aspect of the men's movement believe that men should be initiated into manhood as men were initiated when people still lived in small tribes and bands and ancient cultures. Now, this group initiates men using mythology, poetry, hence the name mythopoetic, and other rituals such as dancing to explore and affirm the value of masculinity and masculine approaches to problem solving. Men who subscribe to this viewpoint worry that too much contact with women and too little contact with other men has turned them into weaklings or wimps. So the men's movement is very diverse. A man who wants to join the movement has many options of just how he will explore the question, what does it mean to be a man in today's world? What do women think of the men's movement? Just as there are many different ways for men to approach the men's movement, there are many different opinions about the value and worth of the movement. Some women, especially many feminists, do not like the men's movement. They feel that it is a backlash and that it is an example of how men are trying to keep women from achieving equality by forming stronger good old boy or male-only networks and by advocating women's return to their roles of housewife and mother rather than business partner or competitor. However, some women, particularly those whose husbands are part of the men's support groups or who have gone on men's weekend retreats, are glad that men are learning to express their emotions and getting support from other men. Barbara Brotman reports in an article in the Chicago Tribune that one woman she interviewed is glad that her husband has joined the men's movement because she no longer feels that she alone is responsible for their family's emotional well-being. She and her husband now share that role and responsibility. This lecture has been only a brief introduction to some of the issues related to the men's movement. Because of many different perceptions concerning the goals and purpose of the movement, it is difficult to give a simple definition or draw a simple portrait of the movement. Perhaps it would be better to say the men's movement is like a tree with many branches and many roots. The movement is much younger than the women's movement, but in one form or another, it is beginning to have substantial impact on many men and women as they try to adapt to their changing roles in American society in the 21st century.